Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. They are Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen. As always, we get together on a Thursday to look ahead to Penn State's next matchup. We'll give you our previews, predictions, players to watch. And of course, this is a little bit different than any of the Thursdays we have gathered for this particular show because Penn State is working with a new coach, interim Terry Smith as the leader right now, and then a new quarterback. Drew Allar is out for the season. Redshirt freshman Ethan Grunkemeyer stepping up as QB1, beginning with a road trip to Iowa, 7 p.m. at night, Kinnick Stadium. Potential weather issues as well. 3-point underdog, the Nittany Lions are this week. First time they've been an underdog in any game this season. We broke down the Iowa Hawkeyes with insider David Eichholt on our last episode of this show. Check that one out. It dropped on Wednesday. That also featured a whirlwind recruiting discussion with our very own Tyler Calvaruso about Penn State's attempts to retain a lot of talent in its next couple of recruiting classes. Talked about the talent that has already left those classes. And we looked a little bit at the job ahead for Terry Smith and the staff on trying to keep this thing together and eventually the job for the full-time coach whenever he does come in. Of course, I need to note, Terry Smith not out of the running, but we have a lot of names that we're monitoring for this job. And over at Lions247.com, we're up to about 700,000 views on our coaching search hot board, which is going to be updated as soon as we finish up this podcast, have a new name to add to that main piece. Also, a few notes to share that we've been sharing in our message board thread. So check that out. A lot of commentary along the way, and it will continue in the days and weeks ahead. 60% off right now gets you in the door, gets you access to all that conversation, every VIP piece that we publish over at Lions247.com. Gentlemen, as I said, it's a little bit different than our normal pregame episode, and that's because we had a different guy to speak with after practice on Wednesday. It was Terry Smith stepping up to the microphone for the second time this week, taking our questions in our typical Wednesday evening setting that for the last 11 plus years has been James Franklin's setting. Well, what do you make of it, Mark? Ready or not, Penn State's got to keep going, and we're going to learn a lot about them yet again.
Hey, first of all, I just wanted to thank the hundreds of people who have come on board at the VIP level. Listen, we know this is a tough time for Penn State fans, but what we're trying to do, and Tyler, you're spearheading the hot board, doing a fantastic job on it, is keeping people in the know with what's going on. So it's great to cover a team when things are going well, but we put just as much emphasis into it when the team's struggling a little bit and going through some changes. What I thought was important Wednesday was that people got a look at Terry Smith as we know Terry Smith. At an introductory press conference, you know, when he's up there all formal and everything else, he's legitimate, and you know a little bit about who he is. But there, he was brutally honest were the words that I used. And naturally, you know, one of the, I think, most important scrums that we call them after practice of the year that I post, and bleeping YouTube where we put it is struggling. So we had to scramble and finally got a thing up, and I appreciate everybody's patience, but you got a real feel for why they call him the truth teller in the building. Very direct, did not pull punches, was very honest about how emotionally devastating this was. And I would rather hear that than, you know, a bunch of BS. And was, again, very clear that he wasn't exactly sure where the team was, but he said one thing, and I'm paraphrasing: they will be ready to play on Saturday. You aren't going to come out of that game thinking they're not ready to play. Now, let's see if he backs it up. Let's see if the team backs it up. But I also love the part, and you have it here on our rundown. Toward the end, you asked him a question, Tyler, and he said, we all failed Coach Franklin. And wow. I mean, when you want to talk about a program that needs accountability, and when you ask him about, you know, the players earlier, Nick Dawkins, a bunch of players were taking that kind of accountability. When your interim coach says that, I think that is just absolutely fantastic. And if you didn't see it, watch the video. That is not somebody saying the right thing. That is somebody saying what needs to be said, because yes, Franklin definitely struggled, but it wasn't only his fault. But somebody had to go, and that's who it was.
In classic Terry Smith fashion, he said, we tell the truth in this building, and we all failed James Franklin. Daniel, you had a story up last night on that subject. It was following up, that question was following up on a commentary from Nick Dawkins on Tuesday. Like I said to Terry yesterday, when Nick says stuff, I kind of view that as a window into the locker room. And Nick Dawkins was expressing a massive amount of remorse and guilt about how the team performed through half of the season, and ultimately seeing their head coach removed from the building on Sunday because of a result. And so, Daniel, as you kind of gathered some of those quotes, came up with some of your own commentary, where do you think this team's mindset is right now?
Yeah, I mean, to go off of what Mark said in terms of Terry Smith's reputation as the truth teller, I asked Zane Durant about that, where I was like, your teammates on the defense are used to this a little bit more. What's it like having the whole team experience that from Terry? And as I was setting up the question, I got a couple yup from Zane, and then he said that he thinks it's really good for the whole team right now. I do think that, in the past we've talked about, how in certain press conferences that, Franklin might be defensive or have an edge about certain things. I think we saw Terry Smith's version of that when he was going through what the week has been like for the players in terms of Sunday was like this, Monday was like this, Tuesday, Wednesday, and they hope Thursday is better than the day before. And the follow up was, like, well, in that case, are you worried about maybe having a, it wasn't worded like this, but I viewed it as like an emotional hangover on Saturday night, and that's where he was immediately like, no, like we're going to play hard, and he said that that's the one thing he won't accept is a lack of effort, and I think that is a tone that is being set right now. I do think that in terms of managing the emotional side of things moving forward, like what he said about Nick Dawkins saying the guilt. I do think that that's the truth. Like that needs to be out there, in that room. And I've seen people, on our message boards and on social media kind of talk about how, the players shouldn't feel guilty and that, they should have seen this coming, and talking about different scenarios in the workplace where something similar might have happened and how, in their workplaces, they would know. But I think the one thing that I know, we compare this to a workplace and we compare it to a business sometimes, but it's very different from any other workplace that that we have ever worked in terms of the emotional stakes that are involved, in terms of the physical stakes that are involved. And Dawkins said that it's kind of like, paraphrasing, but it's like, this is your life, that like your life is on the line. And in football, it can be almost literally every time you're out there. And so I do think that none of these guys thought that James Franklin was going to get fired. I think the way that they talk about him, the way that he coached that team, the way that he ran that program, he had to run it with total buy-in, total belief from all those players. And so I do think that hearing these, emotions of shock, guilt, how stunned they are, I think that's really it. And that creates the big task for Terry Smith moving forward. And I think first step, acknowledge it.
Yeah, I think the word that stuck with me the most from Terry, and there was a lot of good commentary from him though, but Mark, he referred to this group on Sunday as being traumatized. And that's a big word to throw out there, describing someone's emotions. And we heard there were a lot of tears, sobbing, when that parting of way took place, when James Franklin addressed the team and then had to leave, and these guys had to move forward. They didn't have practice on Sunday. But he essentially described this week as baby steps. Tuesday they get back on the practice field. Wasn't maybe a ton of energy there. Maybe guys still working through their emotions. He said Wednesday took a step forward. He's going to need to see it again Thursday. They got to get on a flight, go out to Kinnick Stadium, where Iowa's going to be ready to inflict some damage on them if they're not ready to do the same. And so I'll kind of pose the question like I did to Daniel. Where do you think this thing could go between now and Saturday evening, and how impactful will it be in terms of the quality of football we see from Penn State?
Well, I think it could go either way, and I think if you think which way it's going to go, you're just not being honest. I mean, and that's where, I mean, I said that in my prediction. I wish I could tell people that I have a great feel for what this is going to be, but I mean, we're hearing good things. I love the accountability, but how do you account for the emotional end of this. And I don't know how it could go one of two ways. I mean, it could be really bad or it could be really good in terms of the energy you either get or don't get from the emotional side of things. We know this team is still physically good enough to play with anybody, right? I mean, Drew Allar, great, very good quarterback at Penn State. Tony Rojas, very good linebacker. But even without them, I think this team, if it played its best game, has the opportunity physically to get it done. But where are they mentally? And that's why Daniel and I are both going to be out there in Iowa City, because I don't know that we'll necessarily get a sense before the game. We'll try to. We have field access up until an hour before the game, which will be a good thing. So seeing what the weather's like, we'll be down there no matter what the weather's like.
I'm packing my boots.
The game, it's I think it's going to be really important, win or lose, to gauge the temperature of the team after the game. So I know I'm dodging your question, Tyler, but if I were to say one way or the other, if I had a guess, I think they'll be emotionally in a good place. But that's a guess based on what I know about Terry Smith, what I know about the people he's talked to and what they've gone through, and what I know about the character of a lot of these players. You talked about Nick Dawkins, and it's not just Nick. I mean, Zane Durant has been a stand-up guy. Deni Dennis Sutton is a guy who, after the bowl game last year, or after the college football semifinal, the dude was in tears, but he's there, talking to us. I mean, they have stand-up guys on this team. So my guess is it'll be for the positive, but I don't know. I wasn't in that team room, that squad room. I just don't know for sure.
I mean, I was in that post-game situation after Notre Dame, talking to those guys and down in South Florida, and it was part of the reason why when the band got back together, I felt really good about this team's psyche because the buy-in.
We all did.
But I can't really give them that benefit of the doubt right now, because the last couple of weeks we heard we're going to bounce back, we're going to get our heads on straight, we're going to move on from a loss, we can't let it snowball. And it snowballed in such a way that it rolled their head coach right out of town. And so to me, when you look at what it might look like in Kinnick Stadium at 7 p.m., where the fans are going to be relentless, the Iowa's going to be ready to smell blood in the water and attack, I think there's a risk where if you do show up emotionally charged up, does that gas tank go empty by the third quarter, fourth quarter? Because that's tough to sustain that kind of a mindset mentality for 4 consecutive quarters when you're dealing with the ebbs and flows of a game. Is this a team that has their engines all revved up early in the game? They hit maybe a rough patch in this matchup, whether it's in the form of a turnover or a big Iowa play, and then all of a sudden that starts to roll in a negative direction again because that's been deja vu for them. So I think if they show up and they're flat, that's what you're going to get all night. If they show up and they're flying around, I still wonder if that sustains for 4 quarters, just because that's the nature of kind of the week they've had. What's your emotional gas tank look like, and how does that translate to the field against an Iowa team that, again, would love to land some shots on a very vulnerable Penn State squad? We talked
Tyler,
a lot about
every single one of us hedged on our predictions. So from what you're saying, and I absolutely agree with you. I think you're right. This could be a blowout one way, or it could be Penn State coming. But every one of us, the average of our predictions, the average margin was Iowa by 3.6. So you know what I'm saying? We all kind of so that's, and the line is I mean, so the Vegas people aren't sure what the hell is going to happen. So I don't want to say it's going to be fun, because you don't want to say something's going to be fun based on people who are going through a very difficult time. But suddenly these games are going to be a lot more interesting to cover than they would have been, I think, if Franklin were still here. I mean, and that's no disrespect to James, and that's not trying to downplay what these kids are going through and what these coaches are going through. But from just a pure, hey, let's follow this thing. Right now, there's so much more to talk about. There's so much more to write about with this team.
Yeah, a month ago that we thought this was going to be a quote unquote, trap game.
This was my trap game.
Yeah, and every game's a trap right now for Penn State. And so I think fun is not the word, but fascinating might be the word. It's kind of a case study here of where this team is, and are we going to see the carcass of this Penn State football team, or will we see a bit of a sense of rebirth from this program? That can't be answered until, the lights come on and this game kicks off Saturday night. But what we also want to make note of here, and I'll throw it back to you, Mark, because you asked the question. This is the first time Penn State's had an interim coach since Tom Bradley, which was a very, very different circumstance in 2011. But Terry Smith said they've been in contact. He's learned some things from him over the course of the week. Those two are obviously considered each other close friends. Terry Smith, though, said something really interesting. You've got to win back the locker room, because I don't think a lot of those guys are happy with Penn State leadership right now. I think a lot of them are heartbroken about the decision that came down from Penn State leadership over the weekend. And how much are they really out there trying to fight for the logo on their jersey versus the guy to the right and the left of them and maybe their coach, Terry Smith? I think that's a debate worth having. But I think Terry Smith, some of the commentary he gave to you about Tom Bradley and their conversations this week was also sort of enlightening.
Yeah, I mean, I spoon-fed that to him. Tom Bradley recruited Terry Smith out of Gateway High School, but because I knew what happened. You want to talk about players who were pissed at the university, you have no idea. I mean, you have no idea. And I'm not saying that talking down. I'm just saying I was in the middle of covering those guys coming out of Lash Building, Mike Motti, excuse me, and that crew. And, man, they were fuming. And what did Tom Bradley do? I mean, after Joe was fired, they ended up losing to Nebraska 17-14. Nebraska was number 19 here. The most emotionally charged, and not in a positive way. These guys, everybody was struggling. Next week, what did they do? Do you guys know? Go out and beat Ohio State at Ohio State. Who was the last coach to beat Ohio State in Columbus for Penn State? Tom Bradley. So why is that important? Because there's one person on the face of this earth who has gone through anything remotely close to what Terry Smith is going through at Penn State. And to have it be his mentor and his sounding board, I think is a good thing for Terry. Is that going to pay dividends? We don't know. I mean, that was 2011. Kids weren't getting paid, at least not that we knew. I mean, it might as well have been 50 years ago, right? But I think that the thing that you mentioned, Tyler, win the team back. I think that is key. And I think that's why I said earlier, if I had to guess one way or the other, I think these players believe in Terry Smith. I think they're angry, but I do think they believe in Terry Smith. And that is the one thing, if you're a Penn State fan, should give you hope going into this game.
Daniel, of course, it's not just about making sure the players are in good spirits. It's about trying to find the right 11 on both sides of the ball to give you a chance to win. And some of the stuff that Terry Smith said on Wednesday evening kind of took fire on social media. I shouldn't say took fire, it caught fire on social media and spread around because it was kind of some words that people were hoping to hear a while back, maybe from James Franklin. Terry Smith said that the depth chart is under examination. He said it's his job to find playmakers, and if there's guys that are playmakers, he needs to get them on the football field. And Penn State's been very tight about its rotations, about its personnel plan. They haven't gone beyond the starting lineup at several of their positions really with regularity, even with some of the struggles that have come in recent weeks. And so what are you most curious about moving forward now that Terry essentially didn't say that everybody's job is up for grabs, but he certainly made it seem like there could be a bit of a scramble at some areas on the field, and we could see a snap boost for some players and a snap decline for others.
Yeah, Terry Smith had a couple of good one-liners on Wednesday night, and I thought his quip when he was asked if he was involved in the depth chart, and he said, well, if we lose, you're going to be talking to me about it, and it's my fault. So, yeah, I am involved in it. But, yeah, I mean, the one thing I'm curious about is, like the timing, of this and having to make this change and what's ahead, because you have a bye week after this. And part of me feels like, yeah, I think we'll see some changes on Saturday. I think that Terry Smith will use his opportunity to maybe shake things up, or things that he was seeing, reward those things, or make changes that maybe from his perspective needed to be changed. I think we'll see that. Personally, I don't think we'll see like wholesale changes on Saturday. I think that a lot of this week is like kind of maintenance and management to let's get to Saturday and then let's play the game, then I think you step back. You've got a bye week. Then you've got a whole week to prepare for Ohio State. I think that maybe that's when we'll see major depth chart changes, or, just the significant changes that, everyone has, I guess, been fantasizing about. Like, all right, like, let's blow everything up. Let's do everything completely different. I don't think this is the week you can do that, especially they lost a day of practice and had to move things around. So maybe we'll see things like, maybe it'll be more changes on the defensive side of the ball. Maybe we'll see the rotations change there. I mean, we already saw the cornerback situation change against Northwestern. And then maybe as things go forward, then maybe it looks a little bit different. I do think that, the way that these things work, it's like, I don't think it's going to be a completely different team out there, but I do think that Terry Smith knows that changes need to happen. I think he also knows that the fan base, needs to hear that, wants to hear that they're looking for this. And so that, the conversation around this team is things need to change. They need playmakers. Let's go. Let's find those guys. And also think it's probably a pretty good carrot for Terry Smith to put out there towards guys on the roster that, like, I am listening, like, I am watching, and if we need to make a change, I will make it. But I think maybe things will look a little bit different Saturday, but I think that this week, the way that Terry Smith's been talking about it and things, maybe the depth chart will be more different down the road.
I have no doubt that your answer, Daniel, just disappointed the people who are waiting for you to guarantee 45 snaps for freshman receiver Kobe Howard. But yeah, I think you're right. And Terry Smith has actually brought that up during the Monday press conference, and then yesterday, Wednesday. Monday was asking about, will there be more staff changes? And to that point, he said, I just need a new cornerbacks coach right now, because that's not me right now. It's Jordan Lucas, a former Penn State defensive back, stepping up from his assistant role with Terry Smith now as the interim coach. But he said, he didn't say we're done. He said, we got to get through this week and then I'll assess that. You're right. It's about surviving this week.
And last night he mentioned getting his footing underneath him. And he said it's hard to make immediate decisions. So I think that I should have led off with that instead of, projecting. But I think that he said enough that, like, there's some evaluation happening right now.
Mark, is there a specific area of the field and that you feel is most deserving of kind of not necessarily complete overhaul, but a longer look at other guys, maybe less of a look at some of the more established players? And by established, I mean they've played a bunch through 6 games.
Wide receiver. I mean, listen, the time for trying to preserve red shirts is over now, right? I mean, any of this business about trying to, get through the season tiptoe with only playing guys this amount, that's done, man. I mean, in hindsight, I didn't say it at the time, but in hindsight, they shouldn't have been worrying about that at all after they lost 2 games. I mean, you should have gotten right into trying to get your best players out there. But yeah, I mean, all we've heard, and we mentioned it was last week at this exact same time, wasn't it? We were mentioning Kobe Howard and Tyseer Denmark and all the good things that we're hearing about them. Listen, you aren't getting the overall production from your wide receiver core. You're getting it from like one player each game, it seems. So why not go ahead and give somebody? You're going to tell me that what we heard in the preseason or right before the season started, that Kobe Howard isn't good enough on special teams, and that's why they're not playing him at receiver. I don't even understand that. I mean, let him play wide receiver and let's see what the kid could do. So that's the red meat that the fans want to hear. I don't know where else it would make a gigantic difference. Offensive.
I'm thinking linebacker. Linebacker comes to mind. I mean, we've seen a lot of Dom DeLuca the last couple of games.
Yeah, and I would. The one thing that I worry about that though is they didn't have enough confidence in that UCLA game to go to those guys, which I still can't understand. I'm with you. I mean, I think you're to the point now where, it's stop worrying about next year. I mean, right now, Terry Smith is coaching to get this team to the end of the line, but he also wants this job. I mean, it's important for him to succeed now. Now he wants to get it done now. And so I think any of this stuff with these young guys, if somebody's ready to play, I think you got to give them an opportunity.
When you have your head coach, James Franklin, who's been here as long as he is, has been made as much money as he has put some trophies in the case, not the biggest one of all, but he's filled up that trophy case pretty well during his time. When he walks into the room and tells you he's fired, all egos need to be set aside. Hurt feelings for playing time, that goes out the window, in my opinion. So
he won the Land Grant Trophy. You said the biggest trophy of all.
the heftiest trophy of all, I would call that. But so let's get over to the quarterback situation, though, of course, because this is the first time in 35 games where it will not be Drew Allar taking that first snap at quarterback for Penn State. He's out for the season. Ethan Grunkemeyer, he has less than 40 career combined snaps, and only one of them, the last play of the for the offense against Northwestern, that's the only snap in his career that hasn't come as a backup in a blowout win late. And so talk about a lot to learn. We have plenty to learn about Ethan Grunkemeyer. Daniel, we had a chance to speak with him yesterday. We can get to some of that in a moment, but Terry Smith continues to kind of peel back the curtain a bit on how they feel about Ethan Grunkemeyer, what they anticipate from Ethan Grunkemeyer, and what has stood out to you from that commentary so far?
Yeah, I think that Terry Smith has been very positive about what they've seen from Grunkemeyer behind the scenes in terms of what he's done in practice. I think Smith has, again, went back to the comment that he made Monday about how these are two guys that are now joined at the hip in situations that they didn't really expect that they would be in at this point in the year. And so I think that that's probably, they can lean on each other a little bit, help each other through there. I served up the question to Terry about, I didn't mention Taquan Roberson by name, but the implication was there, the subtext was there about, having Grunkemeyer go into Iowa at night, a place that's tough to play. It's going to be loud. Fans are going to be right on top of them. And Terry Smith said that Grunkemeyer's been handling the upfront communication well. When I left Pagula Arena to go, outside Haluba yesterday to go into availability, I could hear the music and hear the crowd noise inside. So, I think they're drilling Grunkemeyer through it. And, Smith opened the door that, hey, he can give them a jolt. He can be, I think the word he used was a bolt, that, this can be new energy. It can change things up a little bit. It can be different. Like, I don't necessarily think that you can sit here and say that, oh, Ethan Grunkemeyer is going to be better than Drew Allar was. But I think that you can say that he's going to be different, and different playing style, different demeanor, different approach. And I think that that's something that can help this team as it moves forward in an intangible sense. I think that I have pretty good faith in Grunkemeyer physically. Like, I really like his arm. I think that he's, can move pretty well, maybe a little sneaky athletic in there. But I think the big thing for him is going to be, how does he manage that huddle? How confident is he up at the line when things start to go wrong at Kinnick? How do you pull out of that? If there's a couple false starts, how do you respond? And I think that's really what we're going to learn about him. And Terry Smith gives him the seal of the approval right now.
I think, look, it's important to note this. Drew Allar came to the season with a massive reputation nationally, a guy who was projected to do a lot of big things this year, compete for individual awards, take this team to a special place, maybe be the first 2-3 quarterbacks off the board in the NFL draft. But what we saw in a 6-game sample size from this offense and Drew Allar, Mark, Ethan Grunkemeyer is filling big shoes in the terms of locker room presence, experience, but he's not filling major shoes in terms of production from the quarterback position right now. We've seen Drew Allar have moments, typically late in games, second half of games, fourth quarter comebacks, but the body of work this year has not been awesome. And so Ethan Grunkemeyer has a chance to write his own narrative here at the quarterback position, but I think it's not necessarily, you're not bracing for some kind of major drop-off, because Drew Allar wasn't throwing for 280 and 3 touchdowns a game and wasn't zipping the ball around with authority over the course of the season. So I think that there's pressure on him, but there's not pressure on him to live up to some kind of All-American play at the quarterback spot.
No, could this possibly be like the Tax Slayer Bowl, which predated you guys, I think, where Christian Hackenberg was the guy who went in, preseason. Everybody thought he was going to be the number 1 overall pick. And during the game against Georgia, he gets hurt, and Trace McSorley comes in, and everybody's like, oh, man, this team's dead. I mean, they're done. I mean, they end up going down. I have the box score up in front of me. They were down 24, if I could add right, to 3. And Trace McSorley leads this wild comeback. and it ended up losing 24-17, and Penn State was driving at the end. I forget if it was a turnover or what happened. I don't know that that's going to be the case, but it's not unprecedented for somebody who you've barely seen to come in and do some really good things. I think the thing that Grunk has working for him is I know this has become almost cliche in talking about Andy Kotelnicki's offense, but he does seem like a better fit in that he is more mobile. I mean, he's not Michael Vick, but Daniel, you saw him in high school. We saw him at camps and stuff. You actually saw him, and we saw him earlier this season. I mean, showing some of those wheels. So
the blue-white game, even they were rolling him out by design.
Yeah, I think he's just. It almost seems like he's when we saw what Kotelnicki was doing at Kansas, it seemed like it more fit to what this kid's game is. So, am I looking for silver linings? Sure, but I agree with you, Tyler. It's not as if you're replacing Joe Montana or somebody. I mean, unfortunately for Allar, he was having a tough year, and some of the mistakes that were being made. I mean, the interception against. I mean, they were just brain farts. I mean, the interception against Oregon. I mean, missing wide open receivers when we're sitting in the press box. And I always say it's easy when you're up there to see the open receivers, but the best quarterbacks do that. I mean, they see even more than we see. So yeah, maybe there is an opportunity for him to come in and do some things. The one thing that is much different is the atmosphere that you're going into. That's a tough place for anybody. I mean, when Trace McSorley led that comeback, I forget what year it was. I mean, that's when he was
2017. Saquon had a Superman performance too.
Yeah, but McSorley, as good as Saquon was, I mean, when that game was on the line, fourth down, I mean, he made it happen. So he was a seasoned player. I mean, he had been through it, and he was really, really good by that point. And I give Iowa fans nothing but credit because that's a tough place to play. So that's the one kind of mitigating circumstance on the other side of it for Grunk.
Yeah, we talked about earlier in the week when we got together on Monday, I think, where this is a good chance to figure out what Andy Kotelnicki's about. I got a feeling he's auditioning for his next job over the course of these 6 games. I also know that whether you come down on James Franklin as the biggest meddler with the offense, or you think that James Franklin needed to be more involved with the offense, whatever your viewpoint of that is, that dynamic has been stripped away. And I don't see Terry Smith looking over Andy Kotelnicki's shoulder, breathing down his back and being micromanaging this moment. And I think we have a lot to talk about Knowles, but just for now on this show, Daniel, what are you most curious to see from Andy Kotelnicki starting this Saturday? Because he was a guy who was really a rising star last winter, and you evaluate how things have gone the last 6 games. There's plenty of blame. There's plenty of stink that kind of sticks on to coaches and players, and he's also has that sticking to him.
Yeah, I think the one thing that people just want to see is is this going to be different? Are you going to maybe strip away some of the quote unquote gimmick things that people were, I think, a little fed up with by the end? Like, are you going to see more Katron Allen? Are you going to see more of those young wide receivers? Will you maybe even see more downfield passing? I mean, that's just been I think the one thing that's just really stood out over these past couple of years, basically Allar's entire tenure as a starter. Is that it felt like that this was a team more concerned with, going horizontal than vertical. And that came home to roost, I think, at a couple critical points. So I just want to see if it looks different. I think that Grunkemeyer's mobility and just how he's a different type of quarterback, how you adjust things to that. I don't necessarily think we're going to see the Jalen Daniels Kansas offense out there with Grunkemeyer behind center, but maybe you do some different things with him to get him on the move, utilize some of his traits, things like that. I have one note on Grunkemeyer is that, when we were talking about him, it got me thinking, he would, I did a very cursory glance at the recruiting rankings from the past couple of years. I mean, he's the second highest rated quarterback that Franklin ever signed. If I'm reading things correctly.
Let's remember, everybody, he inherited Christian Hackenberg, who was a highly rated guy. But yeah, you're absolutely right. He's the next guy behind Drew in terms of our rankings at 24/7 Sports.
Yeah, and so this is someone that I think maybe has a little bit more, I don't want to say polish coming in or things like that, but I mean, you go through and you had a parade of 3 stars, come through. Trace McSorley was transcendent. He was built like that. Sean Clifford turned in a very, very solid career. But I think like Grunkemeyer is a very high ceiling player in terms of his perception coming out of the high school ranks. I think we would all agree on that. I mean, we've seen a lot of these quarterbacks come through camps. I think that we can see the difference between someone who is a 3-star, someone who is a 4-star, and really what that looks like, what that upside is. And so I think that that's something to keep in mind with Grunkemeyer, that, I know that the kind of the perception of James Franklin's quarterback recruiting is really like Drew Allar, everybody else. But Grunkemeyer is in that second tier, like right after him. So I would just keep that in mind. And I think it's an interesting data point when you're trying to project things forward a little bit.
One more note. I mentioned the word audition with Andy Kotelnicki. There is no player on the field, I think, for these next 6 games who has more to gain from a strong performance than Ethan Grunkemeyer. And whether that's viewing him as the future of the quarterback position here for Penn State with the new coaching staff, or as a guy who would be very marketable in the transfer portal if he were to try his hand on another campus. But he can gain a lot from stringing together some consistent play, some big-time throws. And at the same time, if he doesn't do that, it probably forces Penn State hands to evaluate what they want to do. We've talked about the transfer portal. Maybe this is the winter they finally reach into there for a quarterback, especially if you're bringing in a new head coach. But we'll learn a lot about him. That'll start on Saturday. Then he'll hit a bye week, and then he gets to go out to Columbus, pretty close to his hometown, and play the Buckeyes. And he has the spotlight on him here. He's certainly not lacking for that to make an impact. Mark, before we get to our players to watch and predictions, I wanted to toss the name Jim Knowles your way because that defense has really fallen off the tracks during the last 9 quarters or so of football, giving up some late points to Oregon when the offense finally made a rally, getting overwhelmed by UCLA and the quarterback runs, having a lot of trouble getting Northwestern off the fields, where even if there was a field goal drive, it was taking like 6-7 minutes of time for the Wildcats in possession. What needs to happen in your viewpoint the next 6 weeks, starting now, for Jim Knowles to get to the finish line? You feel better about the trend of this defense, because whoever they bring in as the next head coach, I think we're all acknowledging there's at least a fairly good chance that you're going to retain the highest paid defensive coordinator in college football and see what it can look like with another offseason of work.
Veteran coach Terry Smith, a.k.a. T-Smalls, once said, "We need to get back to enjoying ball, being tough, gritty, and passionate." That's what the defense needs to do, right? They lost that. I mean, in the non-con, they were typically, even though teams were moving the ball, and I know it was a lower level of competition, that swag was there. All those things were there. And they lose a game and it disappeared. I mean, it was there for most of the Oregon game as well. So somehow they lost that. And I think it's as easy as that. I don't think it's scheme. I mean, I'm sure people would argue it's scheme. There are scheme people out there who would tell me it's scheme. But to me, it's more about, having that toughness, being aggressive, playing to win as opposed to playing not to lose. So I think it's as simple as that. It's easy to say that, though. How do you draw that out of the players? And that's to me what I think the biggest challenge for Jim Knowles is now. Not, again, X's and O's or whatever. They tried going with 3 linebackers to be a little bit tougher. That didn't really work, right? I mean, so it's more about mentality and it's more about having that attitude to me.
Yeah, and this is a group that you're right. The swagger, I think that was the word that Terry Smith referenced on Monday, swagger. Yeah, the defense used to always have that. Even when the offense was going through its trials and tribulations against the Ohio States and Michigans on the schedule, the defense would show up. They'd bring some noise, and that predated Jim Knowles. That was with Tom Allen. That was with Manny Diaz. That was with Brent Pry. This was something you can hang your hat on. And the body language has just not looked good. And part of that maybe is taking Tony Rojas out of the equation, not just as a player, but as a presence, because he did bring the juice to the field. But they got to figure things out. It has to start now. And if it doesn't start now, they go into a bye week, they come out against Ohio State. Good luck, because that Buckeyes team will be happy to pour points on Jim Knowles in front of the world if they can do that Saturday in Columbus. Daniel, we're going to begin with you for our players to watch before we get to our score predictions. So which Nittany Lion is in the spotlight for you?
I think I'm going to go with Zane Durant right here. I think Ethan Grunkemeyer is the given when we go into this. But I think with Zane Durant, he's a culture setter, a tone setter for this team. We talked to him Wednesday night, and he was one of those guys that he got asked, is this team like emotionally ready? And he was just like, we're good. Like we're ready. He was one of those guys Saturday night that was, I think, a little defiant, a little, you could see he was a little emotional in the aftermath of that game in terms of how he was talking about James Franklin. And so I think that he's someone that if he comes out and you get a couple big plays from that defensive tackle on the interior, that can really set the tone for your defense. He's a guy who can get that swagger back for you. And on top of that, just if you've got that presence on the interior against a pretty good Iowa offensive line, that'll change how they're playing the protections too. That if you're disruptive in the middle, can help. It can really cascade from there in terms of the edges being able to get after the quarterback. So I'll be watching Zane Durant. I think if you get some pressure from him, get some juice from him early, that can go a long way for that defense.
Durant was as active in an offensive backfield last Saturday as we've really seen from him all season so far. We'll see if he can build upon that. Mark, where do you go here?
I'm going to go with Venga again. I did it a couple weeks ago, and we didn't really see it. And I mentioned him because, to me, he kind of personifies the toughness of the offensive line. So this is as much about the entire offensive line as it is just one player. I don't want to say that he's playing bad all year, but that offensive line hasn't lived up to it. One thing Terry said last night that really jumped out to me as we taped this Thursday, I should mention that it was Wednesday night that he said it. This is a sport where you're allowed to physically unleash yourself. So all your ailments in the world, you're allowed to physically punish the guy across from you, and it's okay. I mean, we haven't seen that from the offensive line, have we? I mean, not to the extent that we expected. And the one guy on that offensive line we know is capable of doing that as much as anybody is Venga. And I think now here's a guy who still has a chance to be a first-round draft pick, and I think if he starts setting that tone, it'll carry over for the rest of the offensive line. So I'm going to be looking right at the big fella, and let's see if he's able to do what we know he's capable of doing because we saw it at times last year.
Ioane, I think, has been their best offensive lineman, and it's not really a close conversation for who's maybe pushing him for that spot. And just to mention the offensive line, because we didn't all show, but we got some things to learn about the right side, especially with an interim head coach there. What happens there? TJ Shanahan has been the primary guy at right guard. We've seen Anthony Donko take possessions from Nolan Rucci at right tackle, and so we'll see if any kind of rotational plan plays out there.
One O-line thing. The Joe Moore Award midseason honor roll came out yesterday. No Penn State. So Penn State. I think that sums it up.
A lot of salt in the wound right now for Penn State. That's a little bit more. That was a goal they set out for a long time ago during the offseason to take the top offensive line award in college football. They did not make the midseason cut, and that's justified based on what we saw. This is probably the deepest we've gone into a pregame show, without me mentioning the name Kaytron Allen. So let me put an end to that. Kaytron Allen, I said it before, he needs to be your North Star when things go awry. Well, things are way awry. I mean, you can't imagine a more awry situation for this offense right now, following the firing of your coach, following the loss of your starting quarterback, going on the road to a place like Kinnick Stadium in a night game with a guy who's played one snap in Big Ten play at quarterback. And so to me, if there was ever an opportunity to feature Kaytron Allen, this is it. He's coming off a 16-carry, 90-yard performance against Northwestern, right around 5.5 yards per carry. On the season, he's at 6.7 yards per carry. The comparative there to Nick Singleton, who's at 3.7, that's been a pretty obvious comparison for a while now. I know that it was the first 9 carries going to Kaytron Allen against Northwestern. He turned those into about 60 yards and a touchdown, and then Singleton got the next 7. In my mind, unless Kaytron Allen is signaling that he needs a breather and he's got fatigue setting in, I'd like to see them ride him as much as possible. That's not to say that Nick Singleton can't be a piece for this offense, but I think right now he needs to be a supplemental piece, and Kaytron Allen needs to be a featured running back. I think you're looking at, can he get him 20 carries in this game? Ball control, keeping Ethan Grunkemeyer settled, maybe setting up some play action through some success on the ground. This is an Iowa defense that right now they're playing pretty good ball, but there are questions about their linebacker unit. If you listen to our podcast with David Eichholt, the Hawkeyes insider, earlier this week, you picked up on some of that. So I think they may be susceptible to a guy like Kaytron Allen getting to the second level, reaching the third level with some consistency. And that's going to come down to the offensive line a bit in this matchup against those big fellows for Iowa. But to me, this is a game where you've got to cling to something offensively, and Katron Allen is where they need to go. And so that's what I've got for you for my player to watch. Let's talk score predictions now. Mark, we'll begin with you.
Last week, Tyler, when I was unable to do the Nitwits TV show, you got a feel for my pain about how difficult it is to make a prediction super early. Well, this week, I had to make a prediction before Franklin was fired. Because we did it Sunday morning, and I have a long history of not changing my predictions, and I was thinking of changing it, but then the more I thought, I'm not going to. So my initial pick was Iowa 24, Penn State 20, and I was thinking, if you haven't guessed, I am very high on Terry Smith. And, after I knew he was, named interim head coach, I thought, well, do I change? Because I think he could get them where they need to be mentally. But then, you realize that not only are you dealing with the Terry Smith dynamic, you're also dealing with the quarterback dynamic. And I just think that's going to be too much for Penn State to overcome. That's not a knock on Grunk. I just think the two of the things combined are just too much against an Iowa team that is playing – just got done destroying Wisconsin in Madison. I don't know what you can say about that, but a big time road win, and it's a tough place to play. So I am sticking with my prediction of Iowa 24, Penn State 20. My bold prediction, and this may not sound bold, but let me back it up a little bit. Grunkemeyer is going to rush for at least one touchdown. Now, what makes that bold? I couldn't even believe this when I saw it, but it makes sense. For the season, the only people who have rushing touchdowns for Penn State are Katron Allen with 7, Nick Singleton with 6, Allar and Grunk with 1 each. So he's effectively, if he scores a rushing touchdown, he will be the number 3 on their list of players with rushing touchdowns. I don't know that I've ever seen this before. Even in those blowout games, they weren't able to get any of the other running backs into the end zone. I guess the one Pena play was kind of a run where Allar kind of, just tossed it to him. But so it may not sound bold, but I think it's a little bold. He's going to double up Drew Allar for rushing touchdowns in his first game as a starter.
Daniel had a good line on our text thread earlier this week. He basically said we're living out a bold prediction, and so it feels like that. This is just the way.
It ain't a beautiful prediction, that's for sure.
Daniel, what do you got for us score wise, and from the bold sector as well?
Yeah, I was kind of in a similar boat to Mark, as how to project this game moving forward and what we're going to see. Like, I do think there's going to be some sort of bounce from having Terry Smith as the coach and having this change. I think there will be some response. And so I was pretty tempted going into the week of picking Penn State to win. But the more I thought about it, and the more you heard some of the players and you heard Terry Smith, I fell into that, what I said earlier, in terms of this week being a little bit more maintenance. And then maybe coming out of the bye, that's when you see the wholesale changes. That's when maybe you see more of the results of this change. But I do think that this is a team where they all talked about playing for pride coming out of the Oregon game, in terms of having 3 losses. You only have pride left to play for. Well, I think James Franklin getting fired really hurt that pride, and I think that this is a team that will respond, and I think they'll play tough against Iowa. I don't think they'll get the complete bounce, but I think they'll make it close. I think they'll lose 19-16. My bold prediction is that they're going to lose on a last-second field goal that comes after Ethan Grunkemeyer, authors a little bit of Iowa City magic, leading a game-tying drive that ends in a Ryan Barker field goal with less than 3 minutes remaining. I think that we'll see some inspired play, but I think that it's still a little too close, a little too raw. There's still, I think, a little bit too unsettled for it to manifest into a win.
That would be, kind of typifying what we've seen so far, where the offense, does something to rescue the situation late, and then the defense can't hold up its end of the bargain late. There's been such a lack of complementary football for this team. It's why it has not been a great team. It's, questionable whether it's been a good team to this point, of course, as well. I end up on the same score as you, Mark, and this time I didn't pick the score for you like I did last week on your show. I've got Penn State losing 24-20 in this matchup. I can work around the fact that Ethan Grunkemeyer is making his first start in that situation, and that they can maybe lean on the ground game a bit. Can your offensive line step up? Can you give it to Kaytron Allen? Can your players make plays when Ethan Grunkemeyer looks in his direction? I do like the energy and poise that you hear about from Grunkemeyer. I know it's relatively untested in a game. I liked his demeanor on the practice field on Wednesday, but it's hard to buy into that compared to what it's going to feel like for him in front of that crowd on Saturday night. But what prevents me from saying that's going to be enough to get it done is the defense. Why would I give this defense the benefit of the doubt right now? They're going against the absolute kind of nightmare scenario for them, a ball control offense, quarterback who doesn't make mistakes, quarterbacks who's won as many games, I don't care what level, won as many games as anybody at the Division I level. He's been through it. He's seen this. He's seen that. And he knows where not to put the ball. He's got, I think, 3 turnovers on the season so far. And beyond that, they have a rushing attack that doesn't have any necessarily one big figurehead in the backfield, but they share it a little bit. They distribute it. They run the ball effectively. Their offensive line is playing at a really high level, one of the better offensive line units in the Big Ten. So you match that up with the defensive line that we keep hearing is out of sync with the overall scheme, with the linebacker group that I can't trust right now. I'm not picking Penn State to win, and that's the motivation is really that defensive matchup right now, and them just not really putting out a lot of evidence that I need to buy into that. And so I'm going to go 24-20 Iowa. And despite the fact that we're talking about the quarterback spot a bunch, and for me, it's really the defense that I can't trust right now, and why I go that way. Guys, you're both flying out to Iowa on Friday. Appreciate the diligence that you continue to put into this.
We need a bold prediction from you, sir.
Oh, you know what? I almost went through the first 6. I did go through the first 6 games without forgetting to mention it. I'll go back to Kaytron Allen, and I think he logs 20 carries for the first time in 13 games, goes over 100 yards, and extends his touchdown streak this season to 7 consecutive games with the score. I don't think it'll be enough, but I think it'll be a big night for Kaytron Allen, maybe give you something to work off of in that regard going out to Ohio State coming off the bye week. So we've all got Penn State falling to 3-4 on the season before their second bye. Hard to believe they would get there below 500, but we're all predicting a tight score. So stay tuned to see what happens. These guys will be out on the field during pregame. They'll be in the press box during the game. They'll be talking to players. They'll be talking to Terry Smith postgame in Kinnick Stadium. And I'll be standing by here in Mission Control in Happy Valley. They'll be sending stuff back to me. We'll have a ton of coverage. We'll get you a postgame podcast as well late on Saturday night. But appreciate you guys for the effort you continue to put in. It's a bit of a lost season right now, but you're doing your jobs, and we appreciate that you continue. Mark, I think you've missed like one road game in the last 35 years, so this is no surprise. But you guys are crushing it. I don't know if we'll be the only 2-man crew out on the road like we were against UCLA, but I think there's a good chance we could be the only 2-man crew from the professional outlets. So follow their coverage at Lions247.com. Yeah, what's up, Mark?
If you don't have Peacock and you don't want to pony up for it, our in-game thread will be the place to be. And I'm not joking about that. I mean, there are a lot of people who are really mad in that this game is on a pay service and refuse, not that they can't afford it, but they're refusing to go. But trust me, we will go above and beyond with our updates from the stadium to make sure everybody's plugged in on what's going down. So sorry to interrupt your exit there, Tyler, but I did think it was worth mentioning.
And I promise our subscribers will provide more colorful commentary than what you will hear during the Peacock broadcast play-to-play. You'll get some incredible insight along the way from our crowd. Appreciate everybody for listening. It's been a big week of news and podcasts and information here at Lions247.com. The beat rolls on over at the site. Head over there. 60% off gets you VIP access right now. That coaching search spread has kind of overshadowed this game week. We'll see if that sustains. I think it will. There's a lot of energy in there. But stay with us on the site, and we'll come back to you on Saturday night with another podcast. On behalf of Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen, I'm Tyler Donahue. Thanks for listening or watching the Lions 24/7 podcast.